Like everyone else in the known universe, I was really excited when Games Workshop debuted Klonk. Not only am I enthusiastic about just all things squigs, but he also reminds me of something from my other favorite game, Monster Hunter. If you're also a fan of the series, you can probably see where I'm going with this, but I'm talking about the Barroth. The resemblance with the rock brow is super strong, and I just love this dude. He might not be as big or scary as some of the other monsters, but I think he makes up for this with his attitude. He likes to roll around in the mud, and if you get him mad, he'll charge right at you and try to flatten you with that craggy cranium of his. His hard-headedness and general enthusiasm for bashing things makes me think he'd fit right in with the Destruction Force, and I just knew I had to paint my squig up like one. Started off by priming Klonk black. I base coated all the fleshy parts with dried bark. This would provide a really good undercoat for all the warmer hues that I was about to put on top to match the Barroth. I like going thin with a base coat just to make sure I get the smoothest surface as possible. I laid down a coat at first, making sure I didn't get too many little tiny bubbles, and then let it dry completely. I think that's really important because if you start going back over it when it's just semi-dry, you can lift that layer of paint back up and kind of get an unwanted texture on your model. For the rocky parts, I mix in some NATO black into my dried bark and put that on like the back half of the rock ridge. Then I went in with pure NATO black onto the front half, sort of wet blending the two. This is a really subtle gradient, but I think it really pays off later. Now that all the base coats are down, this is when I really like to do the eyes. I like to do it at this point because if you inevitably mess up like I always do, it's really easy to fix because you're just putting down some dry bark. I went in with this Liquitex Scarlet acrylic gouache. Looking back, I kind of wish I added a darker color into the eye sockets just to give the eyes more definition, but I'm really happy with the intensity of this color, and it makes those small beady eyes really stick out. Once the eyes were done, I moved on to the next layer of the flesh. I used perhaps the greatest color Citadel's ever made, Doombolt Brown. I really love this color. It has like a really oranginess or redness to its brown, and I think it's kind of like the perfect color for the Barroth. So while I was adding this paint, I added a couple layers, but I always made sure to follow the contours of the musculature. Doing this while adding a couple layers just sort of naturally builds up volume, especially if you sort of reduce how much you're painting each layer. So while I did this, I was just cognizant of like where the sunlight would be touching. I sort of left like his lower half more dry at bark and then slowly built up the Doombolt Brown. Nothing crazy though. I think in total it was only 2 or 3 passes. While applying the Doombolt Brown, I also kind of left his feet and the ends of his tail more the dried bark color. This is because on the reference, it sort of looked like those areas were a little bit darker, so I wanted to be true to that. Really using the Doombolt Brown as more like a highlight at that point instead of the actual color. Once the Doombolt Brown was established, I mixed in some orange brown into it and then used that for my next layer. And then just kept on layering and building up those shapes. Really thinking about where the sun would hit, such as like above the knee or near that hip, and tried to build a nice little gradient leading up to that area. I also used this to pick out around the mouth and some of the facial features. I then went in with a pure orange brown and used that as like my final highlight, really focusing on things like his facial features, his nose, his brow, really building up the area around his eyes, and then also touching up his knees. I then came in with Zemezi Desert and just picked out that like lower bumpy part of his bottom lip and then those tiny bumps on his chin. I thought this was nice to use as a highlight there to give like a bit of variety on the skin tone so everything isn't just the same colors brought all the way up to the same extent. His teeth and claws are just dried bark with incremental amounts of white added to it. Really kind of pushed and pulled on the teeth to get the most clarity there. A little more white, and then, if it got too stark, I knock it back with a glaze of something with more dry bark in it. To highlight the rocky parts, I added white to NATO black and dry brushed it. Adding white to NATO black brings out a blueness, which is kind of nice to have a cooler temperature in there when the rest of the model is so warm. This is the only place I really deviated away from the reference. On him, the rocks are a bit warmer, more like his body, but I thought on the tabletop, this switch in temperature would be really nice. Then for the little spiked collar on his tail, I went in real easily with Retributor armor. To shade it, I used Gore Grunt of Fur contrast, which seemed really thematic. I've used it to good results in the past, but looking back, I kind of wish I just used a watered down dark brown. And then I just kind of picked out the spikes and put a little streak highlight with Stormhost Silver. And yeah, I'm super happy with how he came out. He reminds me a ton of the Barroth, which is super cool. I'm really happy with him. I think it's really true to the reference, but then also is like suitably swiggy and orky too, which is great. I really love this model, and I love that I was able to give him like a super fun paint job and something that's like kind of really personal to me too. Every time I look at him, I'm probably gonna smile and think about a Barroth and squigs and just, all the good stuff in life. Yeah, I hope you had as much fun watching the video as I did painting this guy out. Thanks for watching. Yeah, I just love him.